For joining us for our fourth and final session of briefing of our year 4 evaluation. This session is going to focus on teacher and provider wage analysis that was conducted by the innovations team. On the next slide, you'll see the process that we'll be following for the briefing. Very similar to what was done before. We will facilitate questions and answers. Kenitra Mathis, our program and evaluation manager, will be doing that. We'll be taking pauses throughout the presentation to acknowledge those who have posted questions in the chat, let you ask those questions and have an interactive discussion. All of these sessions will be posted to the board portal so that you'll have an opportunity to view the Q&A session and the briefing, and also pose additional questions as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Kalana Hindert, lead for the innovations team of our year 4 evaluation.
All right, thank you so much, Shara. All right, so as Shara mentioned, I plan on just kind of rolling through their presentation. We have some recommendations at the end, but Kenitra let me know along the way if we are getting questions about a section that I'm reviewing. I'm happy to stop at that moment and address questions that way as well. So a bit of a background and just the purpose of this evaluation. So research has shown us that the single most critical factor for retaining quality preschool teachers is the combined wage and benefits offered by the provider. Research also shows us that low compensation results in high turnover and hurts those efforts to attract new teachers. Additionally, in the US, preschool instructors are earning less than half of what kindergarten instructors are paid. And then teacher benefits for assistant teachers are less than those of lead teachers. And you'll see more as we go through on that topic. So based on all this knowledge, CPP wanted to understand what are those factors impacting teacher and provider recruitment, retention, and wages within the CPP network, and then also how that relates to other local and national factors. And as we go throughout the presentation, you'll hear many references to $15 an hour as a wage. That is because this is a national minimum wage benchmark. It is particularly significant for women of color. And then in the preschool field, it's dominated by women, and many of these women are racial minorities. So this is particularly relevant to preschool teachers. So a bit on our methodology, we did use a mixed methods approach. For qualitative methods, we use focus groups. We conducted interviews with current and former teachers and providers. We also administered surveys. And then for the quantitative approach, we collected data from 92 CPP providers, QI and TA, and we received a total of 359 wage data points to analyze, which is actually a pretty great sample of the network. We did analyze these wages in terms of education, credentials, and quality ratings, and some of the other factors. So let's get right into it. Looking at wage by education level, I don't think there are any surprises here. Those teachers and providers with higher education earn more than those with less. For example, the hourly wage staff for those with a master's degree is $8.37 higher than those who only have a high school diploma or a GED. We also wanted to look at wage by program type. So first we looked at the differences in the hourly wage for TA staff, so this is all staff types combined, versus QI staff. So that hourly wage difference wasn't very large, $14.16 to $12.98. But what really made a difference was when we looked at the frequency at which those staff members were at or above $15 an hour. And here you can see a major difference in the number of TA who are reaching that level versus the number of QI staff who are reaching that level. We also took a look at wage by position. Here we wanted to understand differences between assistant teachers, lead teachers, and then provider administrator wages. So those lead teacher wages were about 31% higher than the assistants. And then the average administrator director wage was about 30% higher than those lead teacher wages. Additionally, looking at hourly wage by provider type. So here we found that those school-based parochial wages were highest at around $17.11 on average. And then the lowest are the smaller type A providers. They had an average wage of $12.34. Next, we wanted to understand, okay, how are these wages lining up with similar positions across the city, the state, even nationally? So what we found is that when you look at our local CPP provider wages and compare them to state and city wages, they're just slightly lower, but the QI provider wages were significantly lower than their counterparts. As well, we looked at CPP and TA and QI assistant teachers. Those wages were below city and state wages as well. But where we did see improved wages are within the lead teacher cohort that had $15 wages. This is the median wage compared to other lead teachers in the state and then locally. And then we found for the QI lead teachers, those wages were a bit lower at around $12.30. So just thinking about what this means in the context of our local cost of living, according to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, the average rent for a one-bedroom would require a salary of $14.84 an hour. For two bedrooms, that looks like $16.64. So what that means is if you are a single full-time worker with a wage below these thresholds, you could not afford housing. What that looks like for our network is that lead TA teachers earning that wage of around $15.49 could afford to rent a one-bedroom, but then the full-time lead QI teacher would not be able to afford housing. Also want to take a look at CPP wage initiatives. So, CPP being very responsive to what's going on in our community and in our network and wanting to make sure that we can promote great retention and recruitment amongst the network, offers two wage initiatives. The first is Teacher Promise Grants. And currently those who apply and are accepted can get up to $4,000. These are open to lead teachers at tuition assistance providers. And this year, that $4,000, up to $4,000 represents an increase from previous years where you could only get $2,000. This year, we had 54 new lead preschool teachers participating across 36 sites. There are also 33 recipients who continue to receive support through this year. So we wanted to understand, what impact has Teacher Promise Grant made on retention? And we found two results that are pretty interesting, I think. We did a survey amongst lead teachers. 13 of them responded to the question about having received a Teacher Promise Grant. And about 31% of those respondents said receiving the grant impacted their decision to stay with their employer. And then we actually looked at behavior of teachers. So for those receiving TPG who are able to complete 12 months of service during this academic year, we found that 79% of those teachers were retained at their sites. So another initiative is the Staff Support Fund. This is offered to QI providers, and it's based on the number of lead teachers at their sites. So this year, 33 quality improvement providers were awarded a staff support fund, and that was based on support for the 50 lead teachers at those sites. So like I mentioned, grants were up to $3,000, not to exceed $18,000 per site. We had a focus group with some of the quality improvement providers who had received staff support funds And they told us how they were using the funds. They were using it to fund professional development for their staff. I thought it was interesting. Some of them said they wanted to ensure wage parity across those who had similar titles in their staff. And then we also wondered, what would it look like if, for instance, teacher promise grants were offered across programs? So to all TA and QI lead teachers, what impact would that have on the system? And we found that an additional 8.4% of TA lead teachers would be at that 15 mark threshold. And then an additional 8.1% of QI lead teachers would get to that threshold of 15. So you're moving at least 16% more teachers to that threshold that they say is pretty important. We also did surveys amongst these stakeholders. And here we did a little bit of research into organizational development and found that there are 3 key factors that influence employee retention and turnover. And I should note, these factors are really broad. They're not specific to preschool teachers. They're for any employee. These are just general factors that are important to people. And those are pay and benefits. Am I receiving an adequate pay and benefits? Work environment. Is there a positive work environment? Do they have good relationships with coworkers? And their job fit, which has to do with fit between work responsibilities, expectations, and also the ability to get to training to do their jobs well. So we surveyed participants about their satisfaction and agreement on each statement, and they responded on a Likert scale of 1 to 5, expressing how much they agreed or disagreed with the statement. And then the scores were averaged. So we're going to talk about the teacher results first. So when it comes to pay and benefits, I'll just read some of the items are I receive an adequate salary, or I'm satisfied with my pay and benefits. So really focused on these items. We found that QI teachers were a little bit more satisfied with their salaries. They rated it 3.7 versus a 3.1. But we found that TA teachers were more satisfied overall with those combined pay and benefits. And then when we said, what would be your desired wage if you're not there already? TA teachers were looking for about $19.55. And QI teachers were looking for about $15 for satisfaction. We also asked what types of benefits they were receiving. Medical, dental, we tried to be really inclusive and gave an option to tell us more. Again, TA teachers were more satisfied than QI because they were more likely to receive these benefits. The biggest gaps were in retirement benefits and then paid time off benefits. And here we ask questions about their work environment. You see some of the items, is my workload manageable? Am I happy at work? Do I have time to lesson plan? Things like that. Overall, TA and QI teachers pretty much agreed with this statement. They felt like they were getting their needs met pretty much across the board. QI teachers ended up expressing greater or equal satisfaction though on all of the items. Then when it comes to job fit, these are items such as my actual job matches my expectations, and I have the education and training to do my job well. Again, pretty much across the board, TA and QI teachers agreed with most of these statements. Here, QI teachers were just a bit more satisfied on most of the items. Okay, now we're going to transition to understanding what providers, the directors of preschool sites felt about these topics. So when it comes to pay and benefits, QI providers expressed lower satisfaction compared to TA providers on all of the items. And then when we asked what their desired salaries were, TA providers were looking for about $25.88 an hour. QI would have been satisfied with about $24.42 an hour. When it comes to the types of benefits that they are receiving, TA were a little more satisfied. And again, they are receiving on average more of these benefits compared to their QI counterparts. And then in terms of work environment, There was pretty much satisfaction across the board with both of these groups. QI providers expressed a little more satisfaction on about 77% of these items. And then in terms of job fit, again, pretty happy with the job fit. QI providers, again, expressing just a little bit more satisfaction compared to TA teachers on these items. So taking all this into consideration, we did have a couple of recommendations. One is to consider expanding the TPG across both programs, as we saw the increases that could potentially happen if we did that. Also, we might want to consider a one-time incentive to address shortages due to COVID. You know, throughout all of our studies, we've heard about the impact of COVID. I think everyone understands that. And generally, there's a need to understand how broader maybe application of the wage incentives could be used to support teachers. You know, could perhaps the staff support funds be used to support TA teachers in the same way as QI presently? It's just important to protect the health and well-being of providers, to encourage and support those wages that match the cost of living. And then we heard this a lot, you know, some teachers and providers and focus groups even said, hey, I'll take less money. The money's not as important to me as a comprehensive benefits package. So that was really important to folks across the board as well. All right. What questions do we have?
I have a question. On your page, you talk about the survey. You quoted a paper that was published in 1999. Isn't that a little old? Isn't anything more current? That probably means the research was probably done in 98. And I know millennials have a whole different way of looking at jobs, and certainly in corporate world, millennials will take less money if they have job satisfaction that centers around more of respect, flexibility, and if the organization is involved in social issues. Right. But again, let's say, are there any more current papers than one published in 99?
Yeah, there were some more current papers. They were kind of focused on more narrow fields coming out of like business or science. I was looking for something that was just across the board talking about employee satisfaction, but I agree with you. We heard some of those comments reflected in the focus groups, you know, the comments about benefits, paid time off, having breaks from the classroom day, that flexibility. We heard that a lot. We also heard comments about being respected, but those comments weren't necessarily aimed at the provider. It was more so the general public, you know, respect from parents, respect from everyone who needs childcare, about how essential and how hard they work. So I agree, there are multiple factors that impact satisfaction.
Well, there's your next paper that you can publish, something more current.
Absolutely, yeah, we'll definitely look for additional factors.
But wasn't that Marcy Whitebrook? Is that who wrote that paper? And she's a in my education field, and she's very well. Her research is just basically justified in all the new research. So this is like the seminal research, if you want to call it that. My question is about these teachers were retained, yet they didn't think it was because of the teacher grants. I wondered.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Laura. Let me clarify there are two different groups. So this first group were teachers that were responding to surveys or in our focus groups. This was a big group of teachers. Some of these teachers had not received Teacher Promise Grant. So we just asked those teachers who were in those groups, hey, for those of you who have received Teacher Promise Grants, how much do you agree with this statement? The bottom stat is on all Teacher Promise Grant recipients that we were able to look at least 12 months of service. So these folks at the bottom aren't necessarily the same people at the top expressing that opinion.
Has it ever been asked of the teachers, what are your top 3 things that make you most satisfied about your job? And that, you know, salary, benefits, all that can be there, and respect, and but that I think might give us a little bit more added into this whole thought about the wage.
Right. What I've heard reflected time and time again, if I were to compile a top 3 from looking at survey results, talking to teachers and providers in focus groups, it's pay, it's comprehensive benefits, and it's paid time off specifically.
I'm going to ask one more question.
Sure.
So if one of your things that you said we should do is to maybe make the TPGs go for all lead teachers, how, where I think it's ethical and but unfortunately we can't do it with the money that we have. I guess I would want to know, how do we fund that? And because I think that's very necessary for the entire environment of taking care of children, that everybody is satisfied, because it is a community when you are in a in this realm of business in education.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, it's a community. It's not just one teacher versus another teacher, it's the whole community, and to make them all justified with that. But I just want to know, I guess, where I think everybody agrees that they need to be paid more. I guess it's where's this windfall coming from?
Yeah, I might defer to Shara or Kenitra to talk about the feasibility of the proposal. We just looked at it from, hey, what if? What if we did this? What might happen? The feasibility is another question.
This is Debbie Alsop. I've been in Never Never Land with this technology of Zoom. I had, in looking at the recommendations, Dr. Hendrick, I think you hit it. I mean, these are desired recommendations, but the feasibility, I think, sometimes people get confused with the two. There's 2 of them that I'd like to talk about from the standpoint of feasibility. The second one, consider a one-time incentive to address teacher shortages to COVID. Okra, back in June, provided pandemic relief for and I don't know what that really covered. It was, a pretty broad check that was sent out. So my question is, how feasible is this? Because there have been various buckets that have been distributed for COVID, COVID relief, and the providers have all benefited from some of that relief. That's one. And the other one is advocate for a comprehensive benefit package for preschool teachers and providers. That one's been on the table for a long time, a long, long time, 20, 30 years. So I'm just, I think it's nice to reinforce something like that, but how much progress are we making on the very last one? It's important, but again, the intent of these recommendations versus the feasibility of implementing them are two real different streams, in my opinion. And I don't argue with them being put in there, but I think that as they're put out there, they create expectations.
Right.
For
So
delivery.
Right. We always try to frame it as recommendations. These are considerations. And next steps might be looking more deeply into how feasible they are. Does this align with the strategic planning that's going forward with next year? We really try to let the data guide us. We try to let the stakeholder feedback guide us in these recommendations.
I'd like to hear from Shara on my question around feasibility.
Sure. So I think on the one-time incentive to address teacher shortages, as you said, there have been one-time incentives, and that may be something that the board would consider again in looking at our COVID contingency fund. But I think something that in terms of feasibility that we're always challenged with is that we have dedicated resources for preschool teachers. And so that is always going to create a disparity when we are at a site that doesn't just serve preschoolers, that also serves infants and toddlers and also serves school-aged children. So even if we were able to do that, which is feasible, we have to look at what the overall impact will be as well. In terms of the advocating for the benefits package, we continue to provide resources to do that because innovative and new ways of how those benefit packages may come about. New things are hitting the market, new things are available, there's stratified things that are available to do that. Some of these recommendations are, as you said, not only ours to implement, but for us to use as data-informed advocacy and information points for our partners that are better able to do this as well. Having this type of recommendation lets us go to someone like the African American Chamber again and say, how can you make this more feasible? Allows us to attract brokers, quite frankly, for early childhood education to say, what kind of benefits package can you put together? And also incentivizes providers in some case to look at how they may be able to do that collectively. So the lens that we look at for these recommendations is not just for Preschool Promise to do, but also for us to elevate the conversation and how others can contribute. You know, I am a little concerned when we say teacher shortages and measuring the impact of that investment. When we do that type of one-time level up or opportunity, it will need to be structured very carefully, as you know, so that we are tracking the dollars, and collateral benefits to other parts aren't bad. We just have to make sure that the primary benefit goes to preschool and start to talk about the complexity of the system, as you know. Everything that we do in the preschool space has an infant toddler impact as well. So I know that that is something that the Cost of Quality Committee is also considering very carefully about what those one-time incentives may be, what the impact may have on the teacher shortages. We are not alone in that, and Success by Six is looking at that as well with the new panel and partners that are all coming to the table to see how we address that.
Do we have additional questions in the chat or on people's minds right now?
I had a question, or I don't know, just something to consider. Because there was one part here that talked about burnout and just job satisfaction overall. And are there opportunities to release some of that for the staff? And bear with me, I'm rambling a little bit, I apologize, but I'm processing it too. So we also talk often about how can we leverage our high schoolers, our college students, et cetera, people, get them interested in early childhood education and so forth. Is there perhaps an opportunity to maybe put together a program with high school students or even college students that where they could internship in centers, maybe in an after school program or a summer program or something like that, and partner with the city or the county to help pay for that. And those students come in and they can take a classroom. It's almost like having a parapro in a preschool class, where you wouldn't have to pay them as much as you would a teacher, but it serves a couple of purposes. It serves a purpose of relieving those teachers. You know, they can take a break, they can do some other things, just be away from the classroom for a while, and give those young people a job, and which has been noticed a lot with our candidates running for city council. Those kids need something to do. So, so that's what I'm kind of thinking. And is there an opportunity to maybe bring those people to the table and say, hey, let's put together not just a one-time thing, but something that's sustainable? Because we're real good at those one-hit wonders, or and then they go away. But something that's sustainable, where these students can get a taste of what it's like to work in that environment, what it's like to be responsible, and to help those adults in the classroom get the relief that they need. This is something small, but maybe adds to the job satisfaction part.
I'd like to talk about that, because that's really what my program's doing right now, is that they are going out into the providers and they are working. There's some drawbacks, and they are being paid because of it's a workforce development program. Can't remember what it's called off the top of my head. I've got a raging headache today, but so they're going to get a stipend, and they're getting that workforce time. And the only problem about relieving the teacher stress is really they can't be employed because they don't have their high school diploma, because that's the crux of counting and ratio. I mean, they can be employed, but they can't count in the ratio. So therefore, if a teacher steps out, they still need to have the right number of other adults in that classroom. So, so that's rough. It depends. Some of my students can be employed depending on how they're taking their course. Not employed, used in ratio, but but we are having that. I'm having a hard time in the recruitment of students to say, do you want to even become a teacher? This is a great introduction. Do you want to be a teacher? Do you want to be a child care provider? What, how are we going to go about this? It is hard to recruit these students because they just, I don't know. I felt like I spent an entire quarter trying to recruit them, and things would get in our way. They would say they'd be interested in it, and they aren't. And that recruitment piece is the hardest part. Even though you get paid, you get paid for this, and it counts as a grade and all this, and I'm giving you, no. But
I think that, as you say, Laura, that recruitment is the difficult piece, but I think our focus on recruitment and retention and that wage parity piece is exactly what you described. Marcia, we're working with Laura to have CPS students who are in that pipeline and just getting started to introduce them to the profession. We are working with Cincinnati State for students who are in the early childhood education program who are looking for now work study and practicum sites. Those are being matched up as well. We're also engaged with the program with the Urban League that's doing the Opportunity Youth from 18 to 24 who are getting paid in a CDA program as a pilot program with the first set of students as well. We are also working with the new consortium of Black childcare providers who just submitted a grant for an apprenticeship program that would do that entire track through all levels, starting with recruiting people that are already working in other fields that may be related, but really, really doing it as a true apprenticeship so that we support you through credentialing all the way to post-secondary, bachelor's degree and master's degree as well. And so we are trying to hit all aspects and levels of that to say, how can we do it? The biggest challenge is the number of teachers who are already at community providers who need to do educational attainment to make sure that those stars can maintain, because there's a large number of those who are already dedicated to the field. The challenge is not paying for the education, not giving them access, but finding someone to sit in their seat and take on their job responsibilities while they do that continuing education. So that's where our cruxes are, kind of our pain point, right? The other places have programs that are in process at those levels you described, that are in the works, that are pending funding, that everybody is making efforts to do. And our role is to sit and say, how do we support an initiative that's doing that? It's challenging for CPP to try to drive that. instead of getting in where we fit in, which is making the connection with the community providers, providing resources and expanding, looking at how we offer the wage supplements outside of the box. But our goal is to really determine how we can match those up with some continuity of who's not only interested in the field, but interested in staying in a community provider site as an educator.
And glad to hear that it's already being worked. It's just got its set of challenges. Okay. I have another half-baked idea, but I better let it stay in the oven for a little bit before I share.
We love half-baked ideas. We'll help you cook it. We love them.
So it's one of the problems.
Go ahead and bake.
Dr. Owens. Go ahead.
I just want to encourage you to, if it's half baked, go ahead and put it out there.
Okay, you want this half-baked potato, so let me make sure I understand. One challenge I think I heard was, if you have a classroom and the teacher needs to do their work to do their certification, whatever, and you have one of these folks on the pipeline, is the problem, I think Laura used the term about being able to be added to the ratio, I guess the ratio between students and teachers, that they don't qualify. Is it because they're not licensed, or is it because of their age, or what is the why?
Mine is because they do not have a high school diploma yet, because they're in high school.
Okay.
But if, like I said before, if they're in certain classes, they can count in that ratio. But yes, so that's, but adults, someone that has graduated or had gotten their GED can count in that ratio. And we could, adult wise, and I've been trying to push this CDA program onto our ABLE program upstairs from my office, which is the adult basic, they're the people getting adults who did not graduate from high school, either their GED or their credits that they need to graduate, and then getting them into this cycle. And I'm gonna get a person here and a person there and a person here and a person there. And so I try to get them first into the field. So I am supporting those people to try to get them, show them here's where the jobs are. And then once they're in that job, they can start into that educational field.
So my half-baked idea is there another stream of adults that could be added to that scenario? Not necessarily people who are interested in being in childcare or in the education field or any of that, but as a help to those centers, to allow those teachers to do whatever they need to do. For example, what if there was a grandparent program or a retired people program, and the criteria would be you have to have your high school diploma at a minimum, or whatever that is, and pass the background check, all that fun stuff. And you built pools of those people in different neighborhoods so that they can go maybe, you know, at lunchtime and do lunch or do something that would free up time for those teachers.
I think the friend, family, and neighbor idea is a fantastic one. We will take that to our partners, because we actually had, if you all remember, a line item in our budget that funded a pool of substitutes. Right? And we contacted several agencies who used to help us provide those substitutes. As you can imagine, there are none available in this climate, but perhaps talking with them about how they recruit the friend, family, and neighbor who are trusted members of the community, who have experience in doing that, who would be easily credentialed and background checked, that would be able to serve that purpose.
Yeah.
Great idea.
Yeah, I know that right now we are using, we in CPS, the only time we get a substitute para is usually in a special needs class. And the state has allowed like people from a nursing situation to come and count in ratio for us, because they've been background checked and everything. They go with this agency. So I do know that I know that CPS uses those.
But that also ties those providers to the community.
Mhm.
It advocates for the program. You know, those grandmas and aunties in the neighborhood, they spread the word. You know, you want to send your child there, that center's nice, blah, 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 blah. And it serves the purpose of meeting those teachers' needs to have that time to do what they need to do. So.
Great idea.
Marcia, that sounds like something that you and I need to start. That sounds like a great business venture. We'll talk offline.
I love 3-year-olds, but I can only do a couple at a time. No, I do love preschools. I taught preschoolers for 8 years at church. They're my favorite little people. Uh-oh.
Great. Do we have any other additional questions, great ideas, recommendations?
I have one question about the teacher promise grants. Are we under or oversubscribed?
Under.
And could you talk a little bit about that and what the plan is to evaluate the undersubscription?
I think the initial adjustment that we made and the feedback that we heard on why we were undersubscribed was selecting how the amount of funds, right? Quite frankly, because the cliff effect came into place, the variation in allowing the funding between 2,000 and 4,000 gave us some more bandwidth. I think the idea and the concept to drive participation and use a little bit more is a few recommendations that are deeper in the full report to say how we communicate that directly to teachers. And we do have a strategy in place that lets us go directly to the teacher through some OAEYC membership and other things, rather than just leaving it at the director or primary contact to reach out to teachers. And then also looking at new teachers and those work study placements, as we talked about, as they're entering to community providers. I will tell you strategies that work with what we did to get the staff support fund numbers up is probably what will continue, even though it's particularly labor intensive, which is individual calls with every cohort to the provider site to encourage them. But in order to do that, we need teacher contact information. And that is something that we don't have. We are building the cohort for that, but we're open to ideas on how we may be able to get those direct contacts.
We are too. We have been trying that for way too long. I did have one more question. It was about the housing affordability that you were talking about, that if it was less than 14 something and you couldn't afford a home if you were a single person, is that without supports, or is that, so that would be afford it without going and trying to get Section 8 housing?
Dr. Hendrick, you're on mute.
Okay, so you want to know if they sought out other means of support?
No, when you were saying that whatever they were earning was almost 15, not quite $15 an hour or something like that, and that was how much you needed to get there, right there. That according to the renter wages for is $14.84. So is that without the Section 8 support, or is that with? That's my question.
I think it would be without, the way it's written, because I think these data are just on housing rates, and they're just talking about the wages. So, you know, any kind of subsidies or helps, I'm sure, would bridge a gap.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Which is another cliff effect that we have.
So thank you all for joining our fourth and final briefing. As we said, thank you for the rich discussion. We will take these back as we start to plan for year 5 evaluation and items that we can follow up on to provide additional data and information going forward. Things that are recommended to boosting our TPG enrollment and those other things you will see in our goals and strategies for the upcoming year. Again, thank you all for participating and have a good weekend.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing the session. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.